What is going on, guys? I hope you guys are having a fantastic day, a fantastic Monday. It's going to be a good start to this week. We had a really good weekend for the bar, so I'm a little burnt out, but I'm ready to get back to making videos. And for today's topic, we're going to be talking about kind of my opinion on card alterations, card altering Cert's card care products. I actually have one here with me right now. This is the Cert's card care tool. Really, there's no like threads or people talking about this little tool, but I think it's definitely worth talking about, and then talking about, putting products on your cards and what I think about all that. And then PSA grading. Talking about PSA grading, taking all of these cards, what's going to happen in the long term with PSA grading. I can mention other grading companies, but I think PSA grading being the biggest grading company we're gonna see a lot more examples of this issue. And so we're gonna talk about that, and then we're also gonna talk about old certs versus new certs when it comes to card altering. And is this something that we should be worrying more about with the cards that are now being graded as opposed to cards that were graded in the past? Like, one certs and two certs and three certs probably, maybe even four certs. And then after that, 5, 6, 7, 8, that's when things get ramped up. And that's potentially when a lot more cards are going to get damaged. A lot more cards are going to be submitted that are going to be altered. So we're going to talk about all that stuff. So let's go ahead and jump into the topic. What is my opinion on card altering? Okay. Now, if we're talking about, what we call it spit shining. Okay. Just putting a little bit of, water and elbow grease, maybe on a cotton swab or a microfiber. I don't see any issue with that. I think that that's perfectly fine. Now, you are borderline, getting to a point where you could potentially damage your cards long term and allow too much moisture, too much humidity into your cards, into the edges, and this could damage cards long term. But I think if you're just doing a little dab, like a tiny little kind of cotton swab, small piece of microfiber, and you're just very lightly dampening it and then wiping a card down really quickly before you send it into PSA, before you put a card up for sale, or if you just buy a big collection of cards. This was one thing I did early on when I was collecting. I would buy big vintage lots, and then I would wipe down all of the cards, and I wouldn't use any particular thing. I think when I very first started doing this, I thought it was probably okay to use like Dawn dish soap, just a little dollop of Dawn dish soap detergent on like a microfiber that was damp, and then basically use that same thing to wipe several cards, right? You need very little of it, but even then, I knew that it was probably not going to be good for the cards long term. And since I no longer have any of those cards, some of them I still have, some of them have actually been graded and did well, but that's besides the point. Looking back, probably wouldn't even use soap, probably would just dampen like a microfiber and just do a quick wipe down of a card. Take whatever grime is on there, dust, dirt. So many times, I get a card that was graded at some point and someone probably just submitted it, which is what you're supposed to do. You're really not supposed to wipe these cards down. I mean, according to PSA, it's really just you send it in and it has a patina of dirt or crust on it, whatever. It gives the card's character. I've seen a lot of cards like that, and I'm starting to understand that there's nothing wrong with seeing a little bit of dirt, a little patina. It's very frustrating because the card is, in this display encapsulated forever, and you just wish it didn't have that one speck on there or a smudge. So I completely understand that. But, a lot of people are starting to bring up Cert's card care. And I actually like this tool a lot. This is like a crease dent removing tool. Probably doesn't work great in the long term. Like, I feel like cards will usually just revert back to their old condition. It might take a couple of weeks or months or days. I don't know how well this works, but I have used it on a couple of cheap modern cards, I've bent them or did tiny corner bends, and then I tried to work it out with this thing. And honestly, it's worked very, very well. It's worked very, very well, almost to a point where it's not even noticeable the card was ever dented or creased anymore. So, you know, I do wonder, could a tool like this ever work? Mind you, this little piece of rubber plastic on here with this little piece of wood, or whatever this is made out of, I think it's definitely wood. This was $20 on kurtzcardcare.com or however you say his website. It was $20 on there. I think it was definitely a bit much. I think this tool is probably more like a $5 tool or $3. Did it have to be $20? Probably not, but I did want to give it a try. He said he's gone through many different materials trying to find the thing with the right rigidity. And I guess I understand that. He's had to go through trying to develop the perfect tool. But, you know, there's just something about this that seems a little too good to be true, a little too simple. But I can say without a doubt that it does work. And I am looking forward to eventually, you know, if I buy a lot of cards or buy a collection and there's some dented or creased cards, you know, for my personal collection, this would be an interesting tool to use to see if I could, you know, revive some of those cards a little bit. But in terms of his card care products and chemicals and things of that nature, I would not buy any of those products. I would not use any of those products. I've talked to my friends about this. They would not use any of those products. I would urge you to refrain from using any card products that people swear by. I just would not do it. You just don't know how that's going to affect the card long term. And we're talking in 10, 20 years. The card could actually show some seriously gnarly signs of wear and altering down the road. And this is going to be an even bigger problem for cards that have been graded in the past couple of years, because the grading has skyrocketed. Submissions have skyrocketed. The PSA populations of cards have skyrocketed in modern. So it's fair to say that tons of cards are being submitted, and I think it's fair to say that a lot of those cards have probably been altered, whether it was with products or a tool like this, or the humidor method, which is basically you're dabbing, you know, a wet cloth or something, a damp microfiber, you're dabbing it on an area of a card that you want to flatten out, and basically that moisture gets back into the card, and you leave it overnight in a humidor, like a cigar humidor, and essentially it dries it back out, but it's flattened between like two pieces of glass or just two very flat hard surfaces clamped together the way Cert does it. You know, he does a lot of videos showing how he basically revives a lot of these cards. And I think, I'm just talking about his products in general and like my opinions on them, but I'm pretty sure there is a card that he altered, like a big baseball card that he altered, that I think Rattle just talked about this. Maybe Opossum was talking about this too, because I know they've both brought up his services. But I think he had a card rejected for altering recently, not too long ago. I think like a high-end card that he sent in and changed or was trying to revive. And, you know, I think it's an awesome thing what he's trying to do. I think a lot of it is just our perception and the misconception that like trying to revive a card or restore it the same way we do to other things like cars, which I know Opossum was saying like it's not comparable. You know, that we're comparing cardboard with, you know, a metal essentially. But I think that there's a lot of similarities, and I think that a lot of us probably don't think that it's that big of a deal. You know, trying to revive cards, especially for your personal collection that you're going to have in your binder, really don't think it's a huge deal, but it gets really sticky when we get into grading, okay? It gets really sticky when we get into grading. So PSA has been, it's the number one grading company, right? They've been exponentially growing in their submissions. And I wonder with all these Kurtz Card Care products and with other products out there, and with people just trying, I'm sure, all kinds of experiments with trying to restore cards, you know, it leads me to believe that a lot of cards that were graded in the last couple of years, and probably even the last 10 years, honestly, for people that have been collecting cards and trying to restore them and do their methods for a long time. This has been going on way longer than just the past couple of years, right? But I think it's more prevalent now because it's more popular than it's ever been. Collecting cards is more popular than it's ever been. Being involved in collecting and investing in TCGs is more popular than it's ever been. And I think a lot of cards that are going through PSA now are probably being altered in some way or another. I'm sure there's tons of cards that are not being altered at all, and that's great. But it is a little worrisome for especially when you think about cards that I'm buying and investing in. This goes all the way from the lower level cards to the really high end cards. We can see this stuff, potentially ruining cards down the road. And it's very nerve wracking knowing that, like, if you're bidding on a really high end card or doing a deal privately for a really high end card that was just graded, that card could have been altered. Now, this is not to say that, like, we should pump the brakes really on buying, graded cards, because they can slip under PSA's radar. And, I'm sure PSA is going to get better at spotting this stuff out. It seems like they're already cracking down at spotting this stuff out. But PSA has just been making so many mistakes the last couple of years that it would not surprise me if, 10 to 20% of all cards being subbed end up pretty much being altered in some way or another, whether it's dent correction, fixing, small creases or scratches, buffing out scratches with some kind of, solution. That was a major problem that we saw in the last year, 2 years. We saw a lot of people basically using some kind of solution to coat the hollow foil of cards. And basically, instead of that glossy, instead of having a couple of minor, surface scratches, the card would appear glossy like it was brand new right out of the pack. And we're talking about cards going from like PSA 6s, 5s, 7s to like PSA 9. Maybe, PSA 8, PSA 9, maybe even in some cases, some drastic cases where cards would be a PSA 9, but they're getting knocked because they have some light surface scratches, but the back is really clean and they don't have any edge wear. Those cards are passing for 10s. This gets really, really, when you look at the grand scheme of it, it gets pretty sticky. And I'm definitely curious to hear what everybody else thinks of this. But with what I received recently, I bought a Mewtwo first edition, and the card was pretty much flawless when it was purchased. It was flawless before it was graded. And then it was graded by PSA and it was damaged in the process. Somehow they damaged it in the process. There's a line indent going across the card. And that's my first personal experience getting a card that I knew was pretty much mint condition off from the get-go, and PSA mishandled the card. Now, that's a whole different situation. But guys, that's been going on for years and people have been complaining about it. So, you can imagine they're messing up cards by mishandling them at PSA, but this is a way bigger issue in my opinion in the grand scheme of things, is the card altering. That's a way bigger issue because someone like myself, I want things to be authentic. I want them to be untampered. I want them to be pretty much untouched, right? I personally am starting to feel like I would rather have a card that has some dirt on it, that's a little older, maybe it's an old cert, it's an old graded card. I'm starting to think that I would rather have that, or a card that's been in someone's old dusty binder for 20 years than someone, reviving a lot of these cards, cleaning them up, because in the long term, we don't know how these products or methods are going to affect these cards, right? A lot of people swear by stuff like the humidor thing, like it's harmless. You're putting a little bit of moisture in the card, then flattening it out. I just don't know. I don't know. I feel like all of it's pretty much bad, including me, potentially using this tool. But it's just something I was curious about, and I was just like, you know what, I'm going to buy this anyways. But the idea of me actually using this on cards regularly and trying to submit them for grading, I don't even know if it's worth the risk, but I just don't know if I would even do something like that. But it's interesting. I look at this and I'm like, is this really like some next level tool that's going to help with reviving some of these cards and breathe some life back into them? I do like the idea of this because I'm not putting any kind of solution on the card. I am strictly using the whatever foundation I have with the card and trying to basically straighten it out or flatten it out and fix it, and mainly for my own personal cards. I would use this most likely for my own personal cards, and I'm still on the fence about using it because it's just such a cheap, flimsy thing. And if it was a more technological thing and had some science behind it, maybe, had some expert thoughts on it, maybe even a grading company was like, this is a tool that I think people could use to submit their cards, it works really, really well, then sure. But something like this doesn't really, I don't necessarily fully subscribe to the idea that something like this could fix issues long term and actually permanently fix those issues rather than just be a temporary fix. So I'm very skeptical about card altering in general. And it's made me start thinking about PSA grading in general. Like PSA, they're getting away with so much. I wouldn't be surprised if they got away with grading a ton of cards that are being altered. And then that leads me into the last part of this video, which I wanted to be a semi-short video, easy peasy little topic, just kind of throwing my opinion on, altering cards, and that, I think the community would agree, as a whole, that it's wrong. That it's wrong and it misleads, especially for people that are trying to sell cards full time. It misleads the buyers that think they're getting a mint condition card when really they're getting a PSA 7 or 8 that's been altered. That's a bummer, right? Even if it revived, but if you saw how the card looked before it was bumped up to a new grade, you probably wouldn't be happy that you paid top dollar for that newly graded card that was once kind of meh. So I think a lot of people are going to agree that this is a major issue moving forward with the hobby. I think a lot of people probably also don't care, don't pay attention, and aren't worried about trying to fix or alter their cards. But for all the vendors out there, for all the people that are selling full time, believe me, they are altering the cards, they're wiping them down, they're cleaning them, they're flattening them, they're doing whatever they can to make the cards have a little more curb appeal. And like, I get it. You're trying to sell this stuff. It's going to sell a lot easier. It's going to look better. You might even be doing it to your personal cards and say, you know what, this really works. I like the way these products or these tools work. My cards look better, but that's short term. I feel like it's really hard for anybody to say how it's going to work in the long term because it's going to take time to see the direct or indirect effects of trying to alter or change your card structurally or on the surface. So it'll be interesting to see, but I'm really interested how PSA is going to go about trying to solve this issue down the road. Like basically if a card has, like, I'm still a firm believer that a card that even has like creasing or dents in it or anything like that shouldn't even be able to get graded. Like, I don't know, that's probably just me, but I feel like, you can crease a card yourself to get a PSA 1 just so you can sell it for a premium, because PSA 1s are a thing, that's a market, that's a niche. I think it's wrong that people could potentially bend their card in half and get a PSA 1 and sell it for a premium. I think that's stupid. 2, I think that, a card should be judged by its edge wear and its surface wear. If people are going to scratch up the surface of their cards to get a PSA 1, then so be it. But there's just something to me about bends, creases, and dents. I just think they ruin a card overall. I know that it's a biased opinion. I know that, people are going to say, well, Orion, like, a card that's nearly perfect that just has a tiny little ding or dent in it, you can get that right in the pack. So what on earth would make you think that it shouldn't be graded? But it's just a weird personal preference. I think creases and dents structurally destroy a card's value and make it really not grade worthy to me. I mean, I have cards that I still have some of them, but I've had them in the past that I've since sold, and made it obvious of what I see is wrong with the card. But I still have cards that are PSA 9 and they've got, like, one of them has a dent in it, a little indentation. Not a big deal, but to me, that card's worthless. The fact that it has a dent in it, worthless. That, again, that's a personal preference, but I wish, PSA could change how they're grading cards. They have so many cards being graded. I feel like they could get a little stricter on how they're doing the grading, but that's probably going to be controversial. Definitely looking forward to hear what you guys think on that. What do you guys think of dents and creases? Do they really bother you, or am I alone in thinking that they basically flatline a card's value? Like, when a card is dented or creased, the people... Like, I know there's a market for PSA 1, but I would get that. Like, I understand that it's hard to get that, but I think, it should be a major gamble, especially for the people that are purposefully destroying their cards to get grades like that. I think it should be a risky thing where it's like, you could do that, but you might get no value back out of it, because, I think PSA should develop a thing where they basically reject cards entirely that are just so worn down that they're like, we can't grade this. It doesn't fall in the category where we think this naturally happened over time. PSA has been grading a ton of cards. They know what most cards are looking like from most eras that are played, lightly played, near mint. I think it'd be easy for them to tell what cards are being purposefully altered, damaged, to a point of, like, no return, of just saying, like, we're just going to reject this instead of just giving it a grade for the sake of taking money. I don't know. Definitely interested to hear what you guys think of that. And then this is also kind of like a weird take, but I think it holds true, honestly. I think buying old certs actually might be better than buying newer certs. This doesn't apply to modern, right? Modern is modern, okay? All the certs are going to be new for modern cards. You're not going to have modern cards with old certs. So, and that's a whole other thing. Like, I don't know how we're going to be able to tell if cards have been altered that are modern, because there's so many of them out there and the pops are so many out there. The pops are so high. I'm not sure how we're going to be able to figure that out. But for the cards that are vintage, I think one way you could go about collecting graded cards, where you don't necessarily have to worry if they've been altered or not, which still isn't a guarantee, but I'm just, like, putting this out there that I think is probably kind of a smart way to basically get a work around the idea or, possibility that a card that you're buying has been altered. If you're buying an old cert, cards that were submitted years and years ago, those cards have a less likely chance of being altered. Why do I think that? Why do I feel that way? Well, because the culture now, all the money that's flowed into this hobby, that makes me believe that more and more people are going to be jumping on the bandwagon of, like, we can alter cards. I can buy cards for dirt cheap, change them, get a better grade, move it, sell it. I think that's going to become more and more popular in this hobby. I think it's inevitable. But back then it wasn't. It wasn't a popular thing where you were altering cards to try and get a better grade. Maybe for, like, the most creme de la creme of cards, like a first edition base set Charizard, any, like, first edition base set cards that, maybe had a slight dent or something, and the value would be much higher even years or a decade ago if they were in PSA 10 opposed to PSA 9. But for the most part, cards were just a lot cheaper. So there wasn't a lot of incentive for people to alter stuff and change it, change the card entirely, because you could source stuff for a lot less back then. So I honestly, and I get it, the grading standards have changed. They are grading, it seems, a lot stricter now than they were 5-10 years ago. But at the same time, I think you have to take into account that the cards that were being graded were some of the better examples at that time and were less likely to be altered. So I don't know. I'm like, I always go back and forth with what I want in terms of vintage grail cards. Like, well, if I get the brand new cert, the card is freshly being graded. But I have so many old certs. I have 2s and 3s and 4s, and they are so clean. Those cards are so clean, and it makes me, I know that it's just luck of the draw. Whether it's a new cert or an old cert really doesn't matter. It's really about the grader. It's about, the characteristics of the cards, the corners, the surface, the edge wear, if it has dents or dings in it, like all these things are factored in and taken account. And so that's why the grade is what it is. It might even be in my head that, they're grading harsher than they were before. Even though I think most of the community, most of us believe that they are grading harsher than they used to. But I don't know. One thing that I know for sure is card altering is getting a lot more popular. We're seeing it a lot more now. And it's going to be harder and harder to not do that with vintage cards that are harder to find and easier to source in a played, more worn condition. We didn't see that 5-10 years ago. 5-10 years ago, you didn't see people buying, PSA 8s and cracking them to probably go for a PSA 10. They could just buy the PSA 10 for not much more, PSA 9 for not much more. Card values have I want to say, like, I want to go back as far as 2016, but I think in 2019, that's when things really just hit a whole new level. And from that point on now, there's just way more money involved. And when there's way more money involved, there's more shiesty stuff that's going to go on. There's more scamming. There's more altering. There's more stuff like that going on. I hope this makes sense and you guys somewhat agree with me on this. But if you disagree, let me know why. But I think the older cert cards are less likely to have been altered in the past. I think that they are probably a safer bet. And honestly, moving forward, I will never look at an old cert again with this sense of like, oh, it's an old cert, it's not nearly going to be as nice as a new cert. No, it is all about the card. I know this sounds stupid because it's like fundamental, but it is all about the card, not about the grade. So if you look at an old cert and it looks extremely clean, throw out this idea of it's an old casing and it's moved around a lot, which is possible. Cards can be damaged moving around in a PSA casing over time. So there is, the factor of old certs. They've been moving around in that casing for a long time. But, I think there's a big misconception between older certs being worse than newer certs. And one thing that's starting to change my perception of that misconception is that card altering is more likely going to happen with all the cards that are being graded now, with the environment that we're in now, with the markets that we're in now, with all the money involved now. I think it's more likely that newer cert cards are going to be altered in some way or pass under the radar because, in my opinion, the Pokemon hype, like, clearly Modern is doing really well, but I think overall the Pokemon hype died down a little bit, and I feel like PSA is just going to be cranking out cards for grading still, just to keep cards graded. And I know it sounds vague, me talking about it this way, but I don't know. I feel like we're going to get a lot of cards that don't deserve to get the grades that they're getting from PSA. I think they're going to be just cranking out and charging premiums to give people higher grades right now. I think during COVID and during the pandemic, we had such a high surge of cards being graded that, I'm sure cards were being damaged. You had people making minimum wage doing the grading. I mean, I know I'm going all over the place right now. But the main point I'm trying to make is that maybe PSA was a better overall company back then, with a lower volume of cards being graded and probably a lower volume of altered cards, probably makes buying older certs better than buying newer certs. Maybe that should even be the title of the video, but it's not going to be. But I'm definitely interested to hear what everybody thinks about this. Again, this is vintage. Y'all know I love vintage. This doesn't apply at all to modern, right? Modern stuff, you know, Sun and Moon and stuff with Sword and Shield and Scarlet and Violet, all that stuff is going to be modern cert stuff. Because when it came out, you know, the cert numbers were much higher than what they were several years ago. But yeah, that's all I got today. Definitely, you know, as I move forward, finishing the last cards I'm collecting, I will probably, if I see cards that are a little better of a deal or going up for auction, and it's an older cert, I'll probably still pay full market price for that card, because I just have a feeling that it was graded in a different time and a different environment, and that it's a true grade. But again, I know grading standards have changed. I know that may be total hodgepodge. That might just be total crap. But it's just a little theory I have, that now with so many cards coming through, they're throwing out grades right now. I know a lot of people that are just getting 10s back to back to back to back to back. I think that they are giving out 10s a little easier. I don't know. I feel like cards were slightly better condition cards back then, untouched and untampered, than they are now. Strictly talking about altering cards, right? Because the topic of the video is really about altering cards. And, you know, maybe one way that you can get around that, and I think buying older certs is probably one way you can get around that. Anyways, I'm going to stop ranting and rambling. I'm going to let you guys go. Peace!